big one is UFC 294 afternoon show this week because they're in Abu Dhabi and they get what they want. So the prelims are starting at 10 a.m. Eastern. Main card gets underway at what is it
2
1
p.m.
o'clock our
Eastern
time?
time. 2 p.m. Eastern
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
So I might get this in before I have to take my daughter to swimming, but hopefully. But big card, honestly, and we talked about this off air. Like, it's amazing how often stuff like this happens where fights fall apart, a
The week
week,
before the
10
show.
days, and then they end up coming up with a bigger card.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. You lost a fighter in the main event and the co-main event, and not only did they both get replaced, but the two fights are stronger than they were. This is a much bigger show now than it was when we last recorded.
Yeah, no kidding. Because I mean, the fight that I think, obviously a lot of people wanted. I know Alexander Volkanovski wanted it. I imagine Makhachev on some level wants it as well.
Yeah.
It is made again. It's they fought earlier this year, and it was a
real,
great fight.
Real quick on top, I wanted to point out too. On top of that, I'm always also making this better. You got to think how much money it takes them to come up with this, because these guys are getting paid pretty well. I mean, you're talking about two champions essentially. Usman's not a champion anymore, but like these guys are highly paid fighters, and they're getting paid to do this. So really,
between the amount of money that they get from ESPN for pay-per-view and the site fee from Abu Dhabi, I think they can afford it.
Yeah, but the one thing we talk about is how cheaply they pay fighters and this shows when it comes down to it, they can pay these fighters what they need to get them the fight.
and the thing is, like, I'm as great as this card is. I mean, it'll probably do more business than it would have. I'm not sure how much more, and whether it is worth the amount of money that they're going to have to pay these guys. But you know what it is worth? The amount of money that Abu Dhabi's paying them.
Yeah.
And they want to make sure they have a card worthy of the site fee that they're getting. And they've got a long-term deal here where they're doing, a show a year, and they're getting, I feel like they're probably getting $25 million.
Yeah. And this is especially good time too, with like renegotiations too, with ESPN, going on. You want, there's been a lot of, I don't know how much I want to make public, but there's just been a lot of internal debate about whether or not the UFC's phoning in some of these pay-per-view cards and whether or not they want to give them as big of an increase on this, and doing this actually, it helps that from their end, seeing that their backs against the wall, and to make these cards better when the chips are, when somebody forces you to go all in, essentially.
Yeah, and they did. And I mean, and they've got other shows coming up, and they could have saved Alexander Volkanovski. I mean, Volkanovski's booked for a featherweight title defense, right? Or not quite booked, but
it hadn't been announced. But Volkanovski has said that, like, he had agreed, and that it was gonna happen. And he says he still wants to do it in January.
Yeah, and that's in Toronto. That's Toronto,
against Ilia Topuria in Toronto. Yeah,
so that's gonna be tough. I mean, if obviously if he finishes quick, then he can still do it. If he gets finished quick, he can probably still do it. If they have a 5-round war, it's gonna be tough.
Yeah.
He's, they're both gonna take a lot of punishment if this goes 25 minutes.
Yep.
Volkanovski is one of the hardest hitters in that weight class, and in featherweight, and that does still translate to lightweight, as we saw. And Makhachev is, just one of the most grueling fighters of all time, in terms of just wearing people down and beating them. And he's, very much, the spiritual successor to his coach, Khabib Nurmagomedov. Just a great fight. And I'm glad we're seeing it again. I didn't think we would, or, I figured we would at some point, but I didn't think it would be this quick.
Yeah. And I was expecting it probably a year from now, maybe less.
Yeah,
maybe less.
And honestly, perfect location for it.
Yeah,
like obviously Makhachev's going to be huge there, and I assume Volkanovski will be as well. The crowd's going to be pumped.
We've seen instances in Abu Dhabi where the Australians have shown up there.
Yeah, it's not, it's not a super long flight for them.
Yeah.
Probably like 8 hours. And those crowds are usually pretty good.
Yeah.
I do remember one fight, I think it was during the pandemic, where they were just insane. And part of that was we hadn't seen fans in so long, but that, where they, I think the first 3 fights they were just going nuts for. And and that kind of carried through all the way through the card. But and then the co-main, which we haven't talked.
I got some stuff to say about the main event.
Okay.
Main event, yeah. Of course, they're coming off that incredible fight that they had in February in Australia. That might be the front runner for fight of the year right now. It's pretty high up there. It's definitely top 2 or 3. That Makhachev won, but Volkanovski gave him a tough fight, and there's a few people who thought Volkanovski won. So, there's a lot of people wondering, 11 days notice, coming off the hand surgery, is he going to have enough time to prepare? I think the fact that they fought less than a year ago, as long as Volkanovski, he said he was 181 when he got the phone call. So that's pretty good. That's probably 26 pounds, in 11 days. 11 days, for his body type, he's probably used to that. So I don't think that'll be an issue. And everybody will want to say, 11 days against Makhachev. You're talking about a guy he fought less than a year ago. He prepared for him for 12 weeks, less than a year ago. He's familiar with what he needs to do with Makhachev. It's not like a guy he's coming in clean slate, never fighting on 11 days. There's familiarity there. And the same with Makhachev. The only hard thing with Makhachev, he's got to switch from, probably more so focusing on the ground game to he's going to need to make sure his stand up is crisp. But the short notice for this fight, I don't think it plays a difference in that, because, like I said, familiarity of having fought just 8 months ago. I do kind of want to lean towards Volkanovski in this fight for some reason.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't really have a thought, although I have a really hard time betting against Makhachev.
Yeah, Makhachev's hard to bet against. It's just...
Yeah, and just the short notice, obviously, as well. But I mean, it works both ways, as you said. I mean, Makhachev was preparing for a completely different fighter. Obviously, I mean, he's a different fighter, but just a completely different style and everything. Like Oliveira is, just submission expert, hard hitting, but not the same kind of hard hitting as Volkanovski. Volkanovski's more kind of deliberate and focused, whereas Oliveira is just kind of that sudden strikes that he can just kind of hit you out of nowhere. So your defense is going to be different against an Oliveira than it's going to be against a Volkanovski. So but I'm sure he feels confident. I'm sure he feels that he won that first fight handily. It is number 1 on the topology list for fight of the year right now. Obviously, being earlier in the year gives you an advantage on that. Because they kind of have running voting. So, but again, like, it's one of the first fights I think of for the year, and really, there's nothing that springs out at me as better. So
yeah. I mean, the only one that I can think of off the top of my head, without going through my list, that was as good, was that Jeff Shavkat Rakhmonov fight.
Oh yeah, but again, like, and time and place makes a difference.
Right? Time, place, stakes. Yeah.
So, I think it's incredible. And then the co-main, Kamaru Usman and Khamzat Chimaev, which Usman obviously moving up, just like Volkanovski moving up from 170. It's the first fight at middleweight, I think.
Yeah.
And going up against Khamzat, who has fought at welterweight. So, they could have said, hey, you know what, you go down to 170, but I think they, Khamzat missed weight the last time, so they're, they kind of want him at 185.
Yeah, he's told to go. He's told to go 185. Plus, he had signed for this to be 185. Yeah. That'd be unfair to ask him on 11 days to cut to 170.
But it's big risk.
Plus, it makes more sense for Usman to come in on 185 on 11 days notice, because he was probably borderline at 200 and been like, there would have been no way he probably could have made 170 in that short notice.
But Kamaru Usman, coming off the 2 back-to-back losses to Leon Edwards, is very risky fight for him to take on short notice.
It is. It is. It's also a fight he's been asking for since that Edwards loss in March. He wanted to fight. He wanted to fight Khamzat, and I don't know. It's we'll see how much those losses to Edwards affected him. This is by far Khamzat's toughest opponent, and strong wrestler. I mean, Chimaev has been able to dominate with his wrestling. I don't know that he's going to be able to do that in this one.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is like, to me, like so intriguing because I mean, didn't even in my wildest dreams ever even think that we'd ever see this fight. I mean, I guess maybe, a couple of years ago when Chimaev was floating back and forth between 170 and 185, you thought maybe because, Usman was the champion and Chimaev looked so dominant. But as soon as Chimaev moved up to 185, and, I never for 1 second thought Usman was going to do that. Although it's funny because he did talk about moving to 205 at one point, right?
Because he didn't, but it was because
he wanted to fight Adesanya.
Yeah. Because him and Adesanya are close friends, and the whole African thing and they kind of all took a pact that us Africans won't fight other Africans when it comes to like champion versus champion matchups. Yeah.
But I mean, this fight here, I think they almost lucked into something because the winner of this fight, I mean, you put them against Sean Strickland like as soon as possible.
Dana's already said the winner's fighting Strickland.
There you go. So I mean, and I mean, Usman, to do that would be great because he could become a champ, and Chimaev's a guy that
he won't be a champ. He'd just be
champion in 2 divisions. Yeah. And it's interesting because I was just listening to
and Usman does hold a win over Strickland.
Years ago. That's right. Yeah. They I was listening to a podcast on the weekend. It was Josh Nason, our friend, had Ardo O'Call on, and they were talking about, kind of comparing MMA now to the early days because Ardo O'Call still follows it. And he was saying how back in the day, the idea of somebody holding a belt in 2 weight classes was just something you never thought would happen. And now it's almost something like, well, if it doesn't happen, you're not, you almost have to be considered like one of the best fighters. You almost have to hold 2 belts in 2 different weight classes. So it's how MMA has changed. And so for Usman, that would kind of take away some of the sting of, losing this title and then being beaten in the rematch to come back and win in another weight class would be, a great redemption story for him. And for Chimaev, I mean, it's something that he's been talking about since his UFC debut. So, and I'm sure on some levels they probably would rather he didn't win a title just because they've had a lot of issues with him.
But what he does in his outside the fighting world relationships, some of the things he said on camera, some of the fact that there's a lot of people like. I still have not seen evidence of Khamzat Chimaev being in the United States since he was in Las Vegas last September fighting.
Wow. So he probably and it's hard to get it.
I'm not saying anything, but there's been, but he hasn't fought for 13 months and he's been healthy this entire time. So let's
do the math.
And we haven't seen him in the U.S. He may have been. I can't remember. It looks like those videos as I see them. It definitely does not look like the UFC PI, and so I don't know. I don't know for sure. I also don't pay close attention, but there was always those rumors that he could, he could not get a working visa to fight to where he could fight in the U.S. He might be able to come over and train. I don't know how that works, but as far as like fighting, like he may or may not be allowed in the U.S. right now. We don't know for sure. But if that's the case, like that also hurts.
Yeah, then it limits the places that you can book him.
Yes.
So, and the fact that
especially if he were to become champion, because they don't like running afternoon pay-per-view shows.
No, and they're only going there once a year. So, you don't want your champion fighting once a year.
I mean, and like a show we'll talk about that's happening in March. That's not a pay-per-view show. So, your pay-per-views, you are limited in where you can go. So there's also other issues with him they got to figure out.
All right, give us your 3 fights to watch.
3 fights to watch. I feel like I'm going to regret this one, and I don't know that it'll be very good, but it's an important fight, and it's on the main card. It's light heavyweight fight, Magomedov Ankalaev against Johnny Walker. Now, if it's exciting, it's because of Johnny Walker. If it's boring as hell, then it means Ankalaev took him down and just dominated on the ground. The funny thing is, Ankalaev can have an exciting stand-up fight, and he's really good on the feet. It's just he would rather be the boring wrestler and take it down and win, which gets him the wins. It's why he's won so many damn fights. But it's also why when he gets in a fight for the title, when he has a draw and the first thing they do is figure out ways where they won't book him in another title fight because he's so fucking boring. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that. He's just a boring fighter, even though he's had some exciting fights and exciting finishes in the UFC. He just has starting to take that route of being a point fighter. And I feel like their hope is that Johnny Walker has a highlight reel knockout and finishes him so they can kind of put down. But I feel like that's also going to be tough. Johnny Walker, he's been very hit or miss. He's been hit his last 2 fights. I think he's won 2 in a row, 3 in a row. 3 in a row now, 2 finishes. And the Anthony Smith fight wasn't super exciting, but he was effective and he was good in that fight. So I think that's one that's interesting. My next one is a flyweight fight, closing out the prelims. Tim Elliott and Muhammad Makhachev. Makhachev is a guy we've talked about a lot on the show that I've pegged as a future flyweight champion. And he's getting thrown a big test here because Tim Elliott is going to bring the fight to him. Just Tim Elliott is all kinds of crazy on the feet, on the ground, and he's going to test Makhachev everywhere. And we're going to see how tough Makhachev is. And little funny tidbit on Tim Elliott, he announced he's sponsoring a fighter on the Bare Knuckle show. He says the first time he's sponsoring a fighter, he's sponsoring a fighter who's fighting Kevin Kroom, and Kroom is the guy who had an affair with Tim Elliott's ex-wife, former UFC fighter Gina Mazzani. So that's kind of funny.
Yeah,
that's okay. Really funny. I just wanted to throw that in.
Sure. Okay. If Makhachev fights the same fight that he fought in his last 2, he might lose.
He might lose. Yes.
Yeah. He's gotta step it up. Like he can't take rounds off like he does. Yeah.
And my other one to watch is going to be the opener, which is weird which is funny because this has a debuting fighter, but it's Sharbutin Magomedov against Bruno Silva. Okay, I'm pulling up his Tapology because Magomedov, he's debuting. He's an undefeated fighter. I think he's 11-0.
Yep.
Yeah, 11-0. But he's got 10 knockouts in those 11 wins. He is a finisher, and Bruno Silva is also a finisher. He's 23-9, very hit or miss. But of his 23 wins, 20 are by knockout. And when it comes to his losses, he hasn't been knocked out, but he's been submitted 7 times and disqualified once. I think these guys are going to just beat the shit out of each other, and I think somebody's going to sleep in this one, no matter who. I think they're just gonna get the night going great and just probably have an incredible stand-up fight that sees an early finish. So that
Magomedov, not only is he 11-0 in MMA fights, but he's fought what they call modified rules MMA, a bunch of other fights, and he's got stoppages there too. So I mean, he's just a killer, and he's done some kickboxing as well.
And 2 of those stoppages were like retirements, like fighters saying, "I'm done fighting him."
No mas. There's a lot. There's a lot of undefeated fighters on this card. You mentioned Magomedov in the opener. You got Victoria Dudikova, who we've seen her before in UFC fighting Jinyu Fry in the second fight at strawweight, women's strawweight. We've got Anshul Jubli, who we saw. I think he came. Did he come off that road to UFC in South
Yeah,
Korea?
He's part of the road to UFC. I don't think did he? Yeah, he was the lightweight tournament winner of that.
Yeah. So he's fighting Mike Breeden. He's 7-0 out of Israel, I believe.
No, out of India.
India. Okay, sorry. Yeah, it was a weird flag. And Muhammad Makhachev, you mentioned, fighting Chimaev. He's obviously undefeated. And then we've got Khamzat in the co-main, is also undefeated.
You missed an undefeated fighter.
Oh, Javid Bashrat, against Victor Henry. Well, that's a hell of a fight.
Yeah, that one,
on the prelims. Yeah, that easily could have made you think. Victor Henry, I love Victor Henry. And Javid Bashrat obviously is a guy we've been watching kind of since the show started. So lot of great fights on this card, and they really put together a great card. And if it goes the way we think it'll go, that crowd's gonna be just revved up by the time we get to these big fights. And there's some great fighters we haven't even mentioned yet, which I guess you'll get into this whole card right now.
I'm looking at something real quick. Sorry for this little small. Okay,
that's okay.
That's what I thought. Okay, so kicks on. Everything is on ESPN Plus. Prelims on ESPN Plus, and of course, main card you got to buy on ESPN Plus pay per view. But kicks off. What is it? 14 fights. Yeah, 13 fights total. Kicks off with the middleweight fight I talked about, Shara Magomedov against Bruno Silva. Look for that to be an action-packed opener and one to get the night off going off good. Then we have a women's strawweight fight, Victoria Dudakova against Jin Yu Frey. Then we have a pretty interesting featherweight fight, mainly because of Nathaniel Wood, who's on the rise at featherweight. He's fighting Muhammad Naimov. It's a solid match right there. We have a lightweight fight, Mike Breeden against Anshul Jubilee. Then we have middleweights, Abu Azatarget against Cedric Dumas. That one to me that's actually the weakest fight on the card, but then we have bantamweights, Javid Bashrat against Victor Henry. Then we have a lightweight fight, Muhammad Yahya, who's from Abu Dhabi, lives there, trains there. He's actually, I think he's pretty well known in the country, known enough to the fact that on the open workouts that they're having this week, it's the 4 guys in the main event plus him all doing appearances on there. So he's a guy they're really going to be pushing in that market towards fans. So he's fighting Trevor Peake. And then closing out the prelims, the flyweight fight I talked about, Tim Elliott against Muhammad Makhachev. Then for the main card, kicks off with a bantamweight fight, Saeed Nurmagomedov against Moon Gafarov. Then the middleweight fight, Ikram Alaskarov against Warley Alves. Then we had light heavyweights, Magomed Ankalaev against Johnny Walker. Then co-main event, Kamaru Usman against Khamzat Chimaev at 185 pounds. And then the rematch for the UFC lightweight championship, the main event, Islam Makhachev against Alexander Volkanovski.
13 fights, and I would say it's like 8 of them that would be on your 3 fights to watch most weeks.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really fun fights.
Good stuff.
Yeah, not so much names that casual fans know, but for us people that watch every single show, there's some real good stuff here.
And a very good card catered to that Abu Dhabi market with a lot of Muslim and Muslim, related fighters
and European, fighters as well. Yeah. So
and plus Australia with Volkanovski, the Australians, when Tui Vasas fought there, and I think Whitaker fought there. They traveled over there pretty well. So
yeah, although it's kind of short notice for them to get there too as well. Yeah. So as we mentioned, pay-per-view, it's early start, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. on the West Coast, with the main card kicking off at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. on the West Coast. So, should be done by 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. You can still watch those big college football games. No wrestling this weekend, so big other than the usual stuff, but no pay-per-views or anything. So hell of a card to I guess our third last pay-per-view of the year. And hopefully it's a good one. We'll talk about it next week. And do you think well, you already said you're favoring Volkanovski. I think Makhachev's going to retain. So
yeah,
we'll see. Oh shit, I just dropped it, and we got to do our best bets. Hang on, sorry. I had okay. So I'm for my So for my parlay, I'm going to go Javid Basharat and Ikram Alaskarov and I'll go with Sharabutin Magomedov as my 3-5 parlay.
Okay.
And I'm going to say Tim Elliott and Muhammad Makhachev is going to go over 2.5 rounds. And I am going to say that, God, there's some tough ones to call here. Okay, Usman Chimaev. I'm going to say Chimaev by knockout.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a long shot there. I think that's going to pay really well, but I'm just taking a shot there.
All right, we got kind of 2 similar-ish ones here. Okay. I'm going Ikram Alaskarov inside the distance. Actually, okay. And go Muhammad Makhachev to win by decision, and Shara Magomedov to win by knockout.
Okay, so yeah, we're kind of on the same page there. So I can actually go with all those. So yeah, to add main event is tough, man. I was like, I wanted to do like an over 3.5, but I think like either one of those guys could. I can't see Makhachev getting stopped early, but I could see Volkanovski getting stopped. If he gets rocked early, it could be tough. But yeah, you just don't know how that's gonna go. And some of these other ones, like I want to see Uncle Evan Walker. Like you kind of want to see that to go quick, but if it goes more than a round and a half, that last 7.5 minutes is gonna be boring as hell.